Hi, my name is Yasmeen Turayhi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. On today's episode, I'll be speaking with Viola Rose, who is here to be in service to love, ascension, opening the heart, all things beautiful, and to joyfully play whatever part she can in the process of spiritual remembering at this amazing time on our planet. And all of her life, she's been answering this call to go deeper. And she spent many years pursuing truth, clarity, service, performance art, healthy living, sound healing, and so much more. She's also a certified holistic health coach, a certified teacher for Drunvalo Melchizedek's School of Remembering, and is a musician and sound healer. And earlier this year, I attended a 4-day workshop of hers through the School of Remembering and just absolutely loved it. So I'm so excited to welcome Viola to the show. Welcome, Viola.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you, Yasmeen. It's nice to talk with you again.
Likewise. So, Viola, to kick it off, what do you spend most of your time thinking about these days and why?
Haha, the big question, right? I spend most of my time thinking about existence, the big metaphysical questions. They've always been at the forefront. And even more so, even though the further I go down that rabbit hole, say, the less I know. I am a seeker. I can't help but think about it and try to figure things out. And yet, ultimately, it all comes back to, well, if none of this is real, then it comes down to just love and service. And so that seems to be the answer to all my questions, but I keep asking.
What do you think we're doing here on this planet, Viola? I mean, what do you think the purpose of our existence is? And, where do you think we're going next?
Wow, that is the thing that has actually been really dismantling for me lately. With all of my research and all the work and all of my years in the metaphysical field and all the ideas about light and love, and this is a school, and we're here to awaken and ascend. I think even at this point, I don't even know that that's true. I don't know anything anymore. And I don't know what we're doing here. And I don't know if it's actually a good thing or if we're struggling to get out of samsara, which is suffering, which is what the Buddhists would say. Existence is suffering and we're in samsara. We're in this illusion. And is it for our highest good? I don't know, but I believe that we can, of course, use everything to point the way. And so either way, we're growing, we're ascending, we're waking up, and we're going through a journey, whether we chose it or whether it was imposed upon us, that I don't know. But that's what we're hopefully all doing, is on the journey of awakening on some level or another.
Amazing. And can you tell us real quick who Drunvalo Melchizedek is and about some of his work and how you got connected with his work? Because I think that's going to be an important point before we move on and talk about returning to the heart.
Yeah, absolutely. So Drunvalo Melchizedek, he is in some ways, I guess sometimes jokingly call him sort of like the granddaddy of ascension. He's been around for quite some time, and in the 80s was teaching Flower of Life workshops and came out in the early 90s with The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, volumes 1 and 2. And he is a being who will, as he will describe, he is a walk-in who came from beyond the 12th dimension, from the Melchizedek order, to just help bring a sort of piece of the puzzle for this awakening that we're doing, to help us remember the pieces of the puzzle that we need to come into the truth of who we are and the understanding of what actually is going on here. And so he has a whole body of work, and he's been carving out this pathway, bringing forth the information about sacred geometry and about the Merkaba, the light body, and has created a whole body of work. And I discovered him in 2011. I mean, I had heard of him years earlier, but I wasn't that plugged in until about 2011, when I did go to the Awakening the Illuminated Heart workshop, when he offered it for the first time to the public. And I walked away from that workshop saying, this is the most important thing I've ever done. This is amazing. And so since then, my life has been intricately involved with that work. And I became a facilitator for him and trained with him, helped him train other teachers, have been in contact with him, and have been teaching his body of work since then.
And you're one of the 100 teachers on the planet right now who's actually like allowed to teach his work. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know what the exact number is. There may be about 70 people currently who are certified facilitators for this body of work. And yes, I
Yeah.
am one of them.
And can you also tell our audience, what is sacred geometry? What is the Merkaba? And because these terms are obviously going to be important to explaining some of the other questions that we'll talk about when it comes to returning to the heart.
Yeah, sure. So sacred geometry is breaking down sort of the mathematical structure of our world. Like if this really is a simulation or a hologram, it's a little bit like computer code where there is codes that are embedded into everything. The structure of biology, of all biological existence follows a certain code to be coming into existence. And when you look at that code, you can break it down into geometrical shapes, geometrical number sequences. And that's what they're calling sacred geometry, with the understanding that existence is sacred. And so the code that brings existence into form is sacred geometry.
And then what is flower of life? What is the Merkaba?
Well, the flower of life is a symbol within sacred geometry. And it is known as the original symbol. And it is a shape that is made from spheres that overlap over each other and form a shape that you can form a bunch of different shapes within. And there's a deep metaphysical meaning to the flower of life, probably more than the scope that we would get into here. But just know that it has been found in temples all around the world, ancient temples. They all had a clue that there was something that symbol was pointing to. And what Drunvalo says is that it points to unity consciousness. If you understand sacred geometry, learn to draw it, learn how to create it, you start to go into a different part of your brain and understand that everything came from one thing. And that points toward unity consciousness. So
And
that's a little bit about the flower of life.
Yeah, it's so awesome. I mean, I was in Egypt earlier this year and I saw a lot of flower of life symbols kind of all dispersed throughout all these temples. And, there's also, like you mentioned, our right brain is sort of interpreting these symbols and downloading knowledge by looking at them. And so I'm curious, what other symbols in sacred geometry do you think is important to mention here?
Well, I think important to mention is the star tetrahedron, which perfectly ties into the question you asked about what is the Merkaba, because the star tetrahedron is part of the Merkaba. And the star tetrahedron is what we would also sometimes call the Star of David, that shape where it's two tetrahedrons overlapped over each other with a point facing upward and a point facing downward. And that star tetrahedron is one of the strongest shapes in existence. And the tetrahedron is one of the Platonic solids. So it's a uniform shape where all the sides are the same. It's very strong. It's very magical. And a star tetrahedron is what is formed around the body to create a field that we call the Merkaba field. It's also called your light body. And in ancient texts, the Merkaba was known as chariot or vehicle. And it is understood that this is the vehicle that allows a person to travel from one dimension to another. And if a person dies with their Merkaba activated and intact, then you can die consciously, with you keeping your consciousness and your memories intact, which will allow you to go on to further levels of existence and not just reincarnation loop. Be born and forget, and die and forget, and be looped over and over again. So there's the wheel of samsara, the wheel of karma, and the understanding through all these texts and from Drunvalo as well, is that the Merkaba is a secret to activate to get out of the loop, and then you are free and you can travel interdimensionally and go to higher levels of existence.
Can you explain a little bit more about the traveling interdimensionally? Like, what does that mean exactly? And maybe you could give us an example.
Sure. So if you think that we are living multidimensionally, now what that could mean is like channels on a radio. So you've got You've got all these different channels that you could tune into on a radio, and the dial is going to be tuned to one of them, but all the channels are happening at the same time. And so if you just tune into one, you think that that's the only reality. Well, the multidimensional nature of reality, what that people say is that we're existing in all the levels at the same time. So it's not like we are one dial on the radio. It's actually all of them happening all at once. And our dial just happens to be turned here to the third dimension of the earth. But there's other realities going on, other dimensional bands. And so there's like notes on a piano. So you have 12 notes in a scale. And in between those notes, there are like discordant notes that would happen. And you're in one note, and then to get to the next note, there's a little bit of a gray zone. Well, that would be the same case with dimensions. You have 12 dimensions, is what Drunvalo says, in this universe. And in between each dimension is a void, is a gray zone. And in order to go through that gray zone into the next dimensional level, you have to be holding a technology or an awareness or a spiritual advancement that will allow you to go through that void. And that's what the Merkaba provides.
It's so interesting, Viola, and I'm sure that you can explain this better than anyone, really, is I don't experience time the same way most people experience time. Meaning, I find myself being able to get a lot done in a very short period of time. And I tend to have more free time than most people I know, given all the things that I'm creating and building and executing and launching. So I'm wondering, like, what's your explanation for that? Or do you have one?
Well, I would say I experience the same thing. I am so busy. I have so many things going on, and yet it is amazing how much free time I have. So I'm with you on that. And I think that the time thing is just as real as any of it, which means not very much. And so if this really is a simulation, a hologram, a constructed reality that we are co-creating or creating, then the codes, which sacred geometry points to, but there's a lot of codes defining the limitations of this world that we live in. And the codes are breakable. And we know that because there are people who are breatharians. There are people who can levitate. There are people who do superhuman feats that don't make any sense and don't follow the codes of this world. And so they're just codes. They're suggestions that unless you have an awareness to go beyond them are going to limit you. So time, I think, is another one of those. And so it is not as defined as the ticking of the clock. It is malleable. It is stretchable. And when we get to certain states of consciousness, it changes. And I don't think it just seems to change. I think it actually does.
Very, very fascinating. I'm taking some notes. And then what is the third eye? Why is the third eye an important part of connecting with these kind of different frequencies or different dimensions?
Well, Jacob Lieberman has a book called Light, the Medicine of the Future. And in that book, he talks about the third eye. And there's diagrams in that book that break it down that the third eye is, in fact, an actual eyeball. It has color receptors on it for receiving light. It has all the same makeup as a regular eyeball. However, this eyeball is shriveled like a raisin instead of like a grape. And so it has atrophied over time because we haven't used it. But if it gets activated to its fullest potential, it is like another eye. However, this lens of this eyeball looks upward out the top of our head toward that way rather than forward from our two eyes. It was like another way of perceiving. And it is also known as the psychic eye, right? It is in the exact center of our head, and it is just in front of the pineal gland. And well, that's the pineal chakra. The pineal gland itself is the third eye. So we hear the pineal gland, we hear the third eye. That's the same thing. Many people will call the third eye the spot at the forehead where the pituitary gland is, or in the pituitary chakra. But really, an open third eye, you can actually turn it. So rather than having it look upward, it looks forward. And in that way, you're looking out with a different type of looking, a different type of sensing out the spot that we normally think of as the third eye. But the third eye is coming from inside the head. So if that is activated, is given attention, is cultivated, as we learn to do in the Awakening Illuminated Heart Workshop, once that turns on, it's like your psychic center turns on, and it's a different way of seeing. It's like perceiving. So you can perceive energetically, emotionally, sense things, get hits about stuff because your psychic eye is activated. So I think it actually really is an important part of an awakened human to have that
Mm.
center online.
And do you think that everyone can be intuitive once they turn that on? Or do you
Yes,
think that some
absolutely.
people, okay.
I really
I'm
do.
just,
I think that that's our birthright, and we have many birthrights that we have to uncover, right? Even Drunvalo's school that he had was called the School of Remembering because he believes that we know all of this stuff, but we go through the reincarnation wheel where we agree to forget. And so we kind of get wiped. And then we come in here, and if we're, activated enough and on point enough, we start to remember these things. And so I think having psychic abilities is completely natural to us. We just have to turn it on and probably also clear ourselves physically and energetically to get to a point where the body can turn these things on. But I think it's natural. Yeah.
what are some ways that we can clear the body physically, energetically, to help kind of facilitate this more intuitive light body experience?
Well, I think that my two favorite ways to do that are through physical detoxing of the body, because we live in a very toxic world and we absorb toxins all the time. And we're not built for that. We're built for living in forests and eating fruit off trees, right? So our body is amazing and it can detoxify itself organically if we were living in a natural environment. But it can't quite keep up with the level of toxicity that we've got bombarding us from every angle. And so we have to support it through detoxification strategies. And when the body is clean and clear, it's like there's no barrier of density in between your higher self, your higher guidance, these higher things coming in and coming through form. So I think physical detoxification is one of them. And another thing is toning. Music, sound. I'm also a sound healer, and I use sounds to help people come back into balance and myself. Like toning, just using your voice and toning is an amazing way to clear your energy field. And working with things like gongs and singing bowls and tuning forks can also clear the discordant energies and the toxins in the physical body, as well as the emotional and the spiritual. So those are two of my favorite ways, is detoxing and sound.
I love it. Viola, I did one of the cleanses that you recommended a couple months ago, and it was quite the experience. It was amazing, actually, one of the best I've done. And we'll include that in the show notes for folks later. But I'm also curious, when it comes to this idea of becoming intuitive, but then also the information that you get is from another time space dimension. That's what it feels like to me, because I'm clairaudient, so I hear messages from another time space. So I'm curious, what are some of the ways that you've seen other people pick up intuition? And then do you believe that our consciousness is non-local? Where do you think that this information is coming from? I'm just curious if you have an opinion.
Yeah, this has been a really interesting subject for me for the past year, as I had been exploring with prana and, not eating food and actually just nourishing myself from prana. It's been an interesting exploration, but nonetheless, in plugging into the field that I can access through the center of my heart, I access a place that feels like it is beyond all creation, beyond space and time. So wouldn't even call it another space time, because it's like, it's beyond that. And it's almost like my heart feels like a portal. The tiny space of my heart feels like a portal into that place. And I go inward to get there, and yet I can bring it through every cell of my body. I can bring it into this realm. It's also here, but it's so hard to put into words. But I do believe it's non-local, and I do believe that we are existing in some capacity that is beyond anything that seems familiar here in this simulation that we're in.
What is, just because you've referenced it a couple times now, and this was such a big part of our 4-day workshop, but what you would call the small and sacred space of the heart, and perhaps you can tell our audience, what's a way to get there?
Oh, yeah, I would love to talk about that. So, the sacred space of the heart, the tiny space of the heart. This is what Drunvalo talks about in the Awakening the Illuminated Heart workshop. And he also talks in great detail about it in his book called Living in the Heart. And the idea is that most people are living in their mind. And we're walking around, going about our days, and we've been trained from a very young age to be anchored in your mind, in our minds. If you ask somebody, like, well, if you're not your body, but you're a spirit inhabiting your body, where are you located? Most people will point to their head because our schooling, our culture gets us to think, to get out of your imagination, get out of your emotions and be in your mind. And so most people are living in the mind. And the mind is a dualistic organ. And it is a perfect tool for this third dimensional realm that we live in, because this is a realm of duality. Like, you only need to look around and see that we are steeped in duality, right? Everything's sort of good and bad, up and down, light and dark. And so the mind is a good tool for that. It was never meant to be running the show, but it is for most people. But when you're anchored in your mind and you're living from there, then you're living from duality. And so you're going to be kind of creating and magnetizing a life to you that's based in duality. And if you're living in your heart, which is not a place of duality, since the unified field, like that place of like God consciousness, oneness can be accessed through the sacred space of, and the tiny space of the heart, those are places of oneness where there is no duality. So if you anchor and you live in your heart, then you'll be creating a life from unity consciousness instead of duality. It's one of the hugest actual pieces, I think, of the workshop that we go into in great depth, because on some level we're creating reality all the time, and people do a lot of manifesting, vision boards, different things like that, just like, I'm going to think things into creation, and that can work. And yet if you're doing it from your mind, you will be creating what you want and also exactly what you don't want. And people won't even necessarily put it together that result is because you were creating the good thing, but then you also got the other thing. And so the way out of that roller coaster is to like live from the heart. And then it's like a river of grace. And so that's the idea, is to be living from there. And Drunvalo's book is even called Living in the Heart, not necessarily let's visit the heart once a day in meditation. It's about living there. And the workshop and the book are training to get you to practice going into this sacred space so that you can set up camp there and let that be home base. It changes a person's vantage point and everything about life if you're living from that unity consciousness. Now, the sacred space and the tiny space of the heart, they're places that you can travel to with your spirit. Like, as we said earlier, if I'm not my spirit, but I'm a spirit, I'm not my body, I'm inhabiting this body, we could move our awareness. You can find it. Maybe it's in your mind. Maybe it's anywhere else that you might be residing. But you take that little spirit center. Maybe you visualize it like a little marble or a crystal or a little flame. And wherever you happen to be oriented, you start to travel down your body, feeling as if you're actually physically moving through your body. You might visualize it. You might feel it. You might sense it. And you make your way into the heart. And you start at the back of the physical heart. But once you enter in, you start to go into your inner spaces, and you might travel inward until you got to a point that feels a little like going into a sacred temple. Like when I go into my sacred space of the heart, I feel like I'm going into a holy place. And a lot of people, when they go through the workshop, when they first go there, they go, oh, this place. I know this place. I've been here before. I just didn't know what to call it, or it happened accidentally. So it's usually a familiar place for a lot of people, but we're just kind of carving out a reliable pathway to get there so that you can learn to live from that place.
What are like some of the ways that you know that inspiration or ideas have come from the heart versus the mind? Like, how does it feel? You know, I think in the workshop, I remember you mentioning dreams as a good place for inspiration. But yeah, I was wondering if you could tell us, like, what are some ways to discern that?
So when you're in your heart, because there's no duality, there's only love, right? You can experience love even in your mind. It's love of the mind. And so it's love based in duality. So it's always like love and some judgment, love and some doubt, love and some fear. But when you're in your heart, there's only love. And that feeling is so peaceful. It's so balanced that when ideas and inspirations come from that place, they feel so different than the ping-pongingness of the mind. We like, I think that's a good idea. And then, you have all these avenues that you have to weigh and decide and dissect because it's a logical decision that you're making or a logical inspiration. So different when it's in the heart. It's just something that comes in as a yes.
Beautiful. What about sound? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about sound as like a way to heal. What is the role of sound and also frequency? How does that play out in some of the healing work that you do with clients?
So sound and vibration are directly related to biological structures and life forms, which we are, right? We are a biological structure. And sound and it follows mathematical equations in the similar way that biological structure does. And so when sound is balanced and harmonic, and a person who is singing or using instruments and they're in their heart, it has the power to heal because it helps us remember our original blueprint. And when it's being shared with love, it's just an amazing way to bring energies back into balance. It actually is a little bit of a mystery to me. Even though I've been a sound healer for 10 years, I work with people all the time. I'm still amazed how at the end of a sound bath or a sound healing session, people are just shifted and they feel better. Tensions melt away. And it's almost like it's just magic. I'm just in awe of the power of sound. It's like our bodies are at least 70% water. And so as frequency and vibration it moves through the water in our bodies and vibrating it back into balance and cohesion. It's one way that I explain it, that I think it actually has positive effects. And another way is that certain sounds, like especially like a big gong, can just change your brainwave states in as little as a few seconds. And they have found that the gong in particular can drop a person into theta brainwave state very, very quickly. And in theta, it's like that state of consciousness between being awake and being asleep. And people, unconscious mind, subconscious mind can come into play more. And like the conscious mind takes a back seat a little bit and the bridge between the two opens up. So people get ahas, insights, downloads, their immune system kicks online. And so it just does these amazing things to bring people simply and easily into balance. And it's like, it's enjoyable. It's not like you got to suffer for your healing, it's lovely.
Oh, amazing. And let's actually drop into some of the things that you teach about in the 4-day workshop. I thought it was so incredible. I walked away having learned so much about sacred geometry and the tetrahedron and how to build a Merkaba around my field. First of all, what does it even mean to have a field around you? Because I think a lot of people use that term, in this world of energy and sacred geometry. But what does it mean even to have that? And maybe you could tell us like some of the highlights, the themes from the 4-day workshop, so that people can understand what you teach.
So the 4-day workshop really is quite a journey. And it's what I would call sovereignty training. It's to teach us that we have everything that we need inside of ourselves to walk the path of awakening. We develop a connection with our own internal guidance system, which in the workshop, we call the higher self, so that you can listen from within your heart to get the guidance that you need. We also deal a lot with belief patterns. Like if we live in an unlimited universe, then what's limiting us? It really does come down to our belief patterns. So we really talk and dissect a lot about belief patterns and breaking those open. We work a lot with the heart and healing trauma around the heart. Sometimes people have a harder time getting into their sacred and tiny space of their heart because they may have trauma that has happened in their life, which is too painful to feel in the heart. So it's like people set little blockages, little boulders outside of the heart so they don't have to feel the pain. And we have to actually clear that, at least a little bit of a crack or a pathway in order to get into the heart. So we even have a whole healing ceremony to help clear any traumas around the heart. We also learn about breathing prana, which is life force energy that is everywhere. It's like the God particle. It's love. It's in all of existence. And we learn to consciously breathe that into our field to charge us up so that we can activate our light body. We work with going into the sacred and the tiny space of the heart, and also awakening and turning on the pineal eye, the third eye center, and the psychic antennas. And we also learn about Tantra of the heart, as it is called, which is connecting the heart back to the brain so that we create a unified field between the two, so that they're in harmony together, so that the heart is not opposite the mind, so that we can be a cohesive, coherent being. And we learn to activate the Merkaba, the light body, and learn to create reality from the unity of the heart rather than the duality of the mind. That's kind of a lot of what goes on in the workshop.
Yeah, it was a powerful 4 days, very transformational on so many levels. And I feel like I've been exposed to this world for so long. So it was like just everything I really wanted to learn. So thank you for that. And can you also just briefly tell us a little bit about the light beams around the head and how that refers to some of the pictures we see in like religious icons? I just thought that was so cool and so interesting. I mean, I know it's sort of something that you reveal at the end, but yeah, I'm just curious if you could maybe share that what you shared with us during the workshop.
Sure. So Drunvalo teaches in the workshop an exercise. It takes a few hours and to explain it, and then we do the exercise to activate what he calls the beams of light, and they are psychic antennas that come out of your pineal chakra in the center of your head. And there's 8 of them. And they're existing on all people, but they haven't been plugged into the pineal chakra. And they just extend your range of being perceiving and being an energetic being who can be psychically sensitive. And he shows some pictures of kachinas, which are from Native American understanding, they are beings coming from a higher dimension and arriving here on Earth. And they all have these beams of light coming out of their head. And pictures of Jesus as well. You'll see the beams of light behind him in the sphere, which some people think is a cross behind his head. But when you start to learn this information, you go, is that a cross, or could those be beams of light? It's something that Drunvalo learned from the kahunas in Hawaii and the Native Americans as well. They both have the same information on this subject. And so it's really an interesting piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating and just such a reminder of how much we don't know, in terms of where we've come from and where we're going. And I think just like you mentioned, just having an open mind to there's more going on than most people think.
Yeah.
What, looking back over the last 10 years, especially coming out of the pandemic, I'm curious, what's changed?
What's changed in what way? For me, for the world?
What's changed with your work? How have the pandemic and plus time shifted your thinking when it comes to working with others? And what have you also noticed in terms of trends or themes? Do you think people are becoming more evolved or not? Like, I'm just curious if you've picked up on anything.
Yeah, it is interesting because having been a workshop facilitator for the last 12 years, I do get to see the trends, like when people are coming around for the workshop and when they're not, and there was definitely an uptick around pandemic time. And I also felt that this work is more important now than ever because it's like the more that we can be in our heart and just say no to fear, that we can just say, no, thank you. I'm just going to stay right here in the heart and have the tools to be able to do that makes a person so much more empowered and sovereign in the world that is just, in chaos, really. And so I have seen people becoming more empowered, people seeking more. In some ways, it's almost, this is duality. So in some ways I see some trending toward people just not wanting to stir the pot and just wanting to keep it simple. And then some people becoming way more seekers and wanting answers and wanting tools and wanting to understand and activate. So, those are the people who I've been here to support, so I've really seen a lot of that. It's actually quite an exciting time. And even as Drunvalo will say, it's such an exciting time to be alive. We wouldn't have missed this for the world.
Yeah. So it's wild. It feels like it's the best movie ever. What attracted you to this space? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey? How did you get to being one of the 70 facilitators for this work and helping people return to the heart, also doing healing work? Tell us a little bit about what attracted you to this world.
So I had been a seeker my whole life. In my 20s, I was living in ashrams in India and have always dove into different spiritual paths. And when 2011 actually happened, when Fukushima happened in 2011, it was like a little bit of a wake up call for me. And I was like, oh, it's time to prepare for whatever's coming in our lifetime. And I didn't know what that meant. And I started to become a prepper, like storing emergency food and water in case another earthquake would happen. That went on for a month or so until I realized, wait a minute, there's nothing I have to do to prepare for whatever's going to come except for to get into my heart. And even though I had spent decades on different spiritual paths and being a monk in India and all the things, I knew I didn't have it. There was a piece that I was missing of living from the heart. And I mentioned that to a friend and she said, you should read this book, Living from the Heart from Drunvalo. And I thought, oh, Drunvalo, isn't he the guy with all that sacred geometry? And it didn't interest me too much, And that's when she said, no, this is totally different. It's all about the heart. So that's when I dove into Drunvalo's material. And as soon as I read it, I was like, this is it. This is the missing piece. So it's been a lifetime journey that Brett brought me here, from healing practices to all the different things I've done. But coming into this role as a facilitator for this work feels right for me. And it feels like I'm sort of fulfilling what I came here to do. And it's just been a glorious ride.
Yeah, I also just genuinely love the way that you teach and held the space in the workshop. It was kind of perfect, exactly what I needed. So,
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Viola, looking back on this world that you've been a part of, for as long as you can remember, but also since doing Drunvalo's work, what sort of things have surprised you the most on this journey?
One thing that has surprised me a lot is, I've taken maybe over 1,000 people through the workshop. And sometimes you get a sense of somebody comes to the workshop, like they may get this or they may not. They might need more further work in order to activate these tools. And I'm continuously surprised where sometimes it's somebody who you don't expect at all and they don't expect either. And just like that, they activate their Merkaba, they get into their heart, they do it so easily. And then some people who feel really ready and primed to do it, they have a harder time. And so I have learned that you just really have no idea about where a person is and how it will unfold for them. That's been a big surprise.
That's cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, And what about in terms of maybe other, books or resources that have inspired you on this path? I'm curious, what else you've looked at or researched. That you mentioned Jacob Lieberman as well, but I'm curious if there are any others that might be helpful.
Related to this work directly?
Yes.
So Drunvalo has quite a few books out there. And his cousin, Ken Page, also has some interesting books that are related as well. And his cousin is actually his nephew. Ken Page has a whole healing modality sort of related to this body of work. And so I would recommend that. And then Drunvalo's wife, Claudette, also has a body of work that she does called The Blue School and some imagery work around that. So anything on sacred geometry. Greg Braden's work is directly related. Drunvalo also recommends that Nassim Haramein also has a great understanding of size and dimensions and things like that. So that's supportive. The Heart Math Institute also work is very related and supportive to this work. And of course, Joe Dispenza as well would be very related and comparable. Some of the exercises are similar in some ways to what Joe Dispenza does. I think Drunvalo focuses a little bit more just on the sweetness of the heart, but it's very complementary.
Beautiful. Amazing. What do you want to tell our listeners about their well-being, their wellness? What's your main takeaway and call to action for people listening?
I think I would say that we do have everything we need inside of ourselves, and that this world is a distraction by design. And the key to awakening is to go within, is to do your meditation, is to get into your heart, is to be in the stillness of the center. And that the more that we do that, we start to see that the distractions by design are really there to keep us from looking within. So that is, I think, the biggest piece that we can do is go within, go into the heart, activate the awareness there, and live from that place.
Beautiful, beautiful, amazing. Are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you, learn more about your work, and your next 4-day workshop?
Yeah, my website is violarose.com. Viola Rose.com. And so all of my information is there of all the various things I'm into, the cleansing protocols, the sound healing, the workshops. I've got lots of videos, free videos about the workshop, 2-hour intros and things like that. So there's a lot to explore at violarose.com.
Amazing, amazing. I'm just so grateful that we've had this time together, Viola. Thank you so much for your work and creating this body of work for us in digestible ways that we can, use it practically in our life. It was just always such a joy to speak with you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been delightful to talk with you as well.
And for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about being in the heart, we learned about sacred geometry, and so much more with Viola Rose. And you could tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Thanks again. What would you like to see change in your life? And what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing now? I run a 5-week program at the Inner Knowing School for serious individuals who are ready to take the next step in their personal and professional lives. I will personally be coaching a small group of individuals, a number of practical tools and frameworks for creating an intuition practice and for self-mastery. You can find more at theinnerknowingschool.com. I have a master's certification in intuition medicine, and I've condensed 10 plus years of experience and research navigating how to harness your energy and intuition in an easy to access live curated course. Now, as someone who's helped countless creatives, entrepreneurs, and many who are just plain stuck, open doors of possibility they never thought existed, I've seen this strategy transform people's inner states and external reality. And the best part is that you'll skyrocket your output and unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly live to overcome your limiting beliefs and show you how to manage your energy instead of your time. I'll teach you how to create clarity, processes, develop your intuition based on some of the top tools and frameworks that I've developed, and you'll get access to guided meditations and visualizations not available anywhere else. This method is so effective that even if you don't have that much time, or if you think that you might not be ready, this will work for you. You can check out the link in the show notes to join the waiting list, and you can check out what past clients had to say about the program. Wishing you all many blessings ahead.